Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, as well as the October month-long Pumpkin Playground Festival featuring hay rides and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188. Welcome to Gardening with Burke Nursery, the show where we help you grow your garden and increase the curb appeal of your yard. I'm your host, Misty Kacheris, the horticulturalist at Burke Nursery and Garden Center. I just love fall, the cooling of the weather as the days grow shorter and the temperatures drop, and the knowledge that soon the leaves will start changing and color, and they'll also bring more brilliant oranges and reds into our world until we slip into the browns and the whites of winter. It's this time of year that I get a lot of questions about winter preparation. So join me today as I discuss the most common questions to help you prepare for winter. One of the first questions that I always get is, what do I do with my house plants when it comes time for the fall and for the winter? Because a lot of you will actually keep your house plants outside during the summer months, which helps them and enables those house plants to actually grow better. So what you want to do is you want to bring the house plants in before that temperature hits 45 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit at night. The other is that we want to take your houseplant, and this houseplant here, this is a croton. And a croton often loves to be outside during the summer months, to the point that a lot of people actually plant them in their gardens, and then they'll dig them up and put them in the pots and bring them into the house. And they're wonderful houseplants, they're wonderful outdoor plants, but they won't survive outdoors in the winter months. So what you want to do when you have a house plant is you want to make certain before you bring them into the house that they don't have any insects. And so there's several ways that you can do this. And one way is that you could take water, take a hose and spray it down. And that way, if you spray down this plant, you might dislodge any insects that are actually on the leaves. But you need to be careful because not all plants like that water hose approach. For example, if you put your orchids outside, they're not going to like that approach. Or if you put your African violets outside, they're not going to like that approach either. So there's another approach that you can use, and I call this the tub test. What you do is you take water, put it in some form of container, and the water needs to be lukewarm. And then you take the house plant and you stick the house plant in the water for 15 minutes. Because one of the problems that we have when these plants are outside is not only do you have maybe your aphids or your mealybugs or your spider mites, but you also end up having, if you're not careful, you may have slugs in the bottom, you may get ants in here, you may get snails, and this water bath will help get rid of those insects. Now, one other thing, if it doesn't work, you may have to go what I call the chemical approach. And so there are different types of chemicals that you can use to spray a houseplant. And when you do the spraying, you want to spray this at least 10 to 14 days before you plan on bringing the houseplant in. And you can spray with either neem oil, or you can, and neem oil is what we call a 3-in-1, just as this other product is also a 3-in-1. And a 3-in-1 means that it will kill insects, and it'll kill spider mites, and it will also be a fungicide. Then you have some others that are just insecticides. And that means they'll kill the insects, But if you have spider mites, they're not going to kill the spider mites. And so this is a spray. This is a granular. And the granular you would just mix into the pot. And then after you've taken care of your plant to prepare it to bring it in, over those 10 days that it's outside, bring it closer and closer to the house. And then you're able to bring the plant indoors. So that's one of the questions that I get as far as how do I take care of my indoor plants. Now, another question that I get is potted plants. Can I have potted plants during the winter? Well, it's a little difficult to have potted plants in the winter months outside on your deck, but there are some plants that actually will survive the winter. And one of those plants are our winter hardy pansies. And they'll get a little strange during the winter months. They'll kind of weep, they'll kind of fall down a little bit. But as soon as that weather starts warming up, then you will suddenly have the pansies back. So in that way, I call pansies a 2-for-1 plant. It grows beautifully now in the fall. It looks a little strange in the winter, but then in the spring, it comes back. And if you're worried about this plant and you want to make sure that it looks good in the coldest of the winter months, then you can take what I call a harvest cloth, and then you would just cover the plant on the coldest of days with the harvest cloth. Now, not only can you have the pansies out in your pot for the winter months, but another flower, let me just put this pansy back over here, that actually works well is your ornamental cabbage and your ornamental kale. And say ornamental fast 3 times. So this one is a huge one, but I wanted to bring this small one because this is very important when you're taking your kale or your cabbage to plant. And I don't know if you can see how tall this stem is. And this is very important to take a look at how tall the stem is and whether the stem is too tall. And this one, there is no stem. So this one I could plant exactly the way that I want to plant it because there's no stem. So I planted just as is. But when you have a stem on either your kale or your ornamental cabbage, and you want this ornamental cabbage to grow for a long time, and I've had mine actually grow into the month of June and July by planting it, what we call planting it deep. So here, let me show you just what I mean by planting deep. Excuse me, drop my gloves. And glove dropping is so common when you're doing gardening, isn't it? Sometimes I drop my gloves and then I wonder where I even put them. And I tried to get gloves that are bright pink or bright orange so that I don't lose them. But basically, I'm going to take this kale. And if you can see, the roots are actually very tightly wound. So this is what we call root bound. So you definitely need to loosen this. Oh, and another question that I get is this ornamental kale edible? It is, but you're not really going to want to eat it. It tastes horrible. It's very, very bitter. You have to cook it about 4 times the normal amount that you have to cook either other kale or other cabbage. Not good, but if you're desperate, yes, you can eat it. So then I would put this in the pot, and when I say plant deep, what I have done here is I've taken the soil, and I don't know if we can, one more other thing that I forgot to say, and this is why I wanted to show you this. See these leaves? They're pretty bleak. They're pretty bad. You just take them off because kale grows up top, which means if you take off these leaves that aren't so good the way kale grows, it will actually grow even longer. So planting it in the pot. And I plant it so that it is totally up to the bottom leaf. So that big stem is not to be seen at all. So as you can see, and I'm going to tilt this pot so you can see that that soil is coming to the very lower leaves that are there in this kale. And that means this is going to grow. The stem that I planted is actually going to grow roots, and you are going to have a beautiful, wonderful kale that may last you through June. And again, if you're worried about the cold months, well then just take that frost cover that I showed you and just again cover. And the very cold months when the temperatures go down for 2 or 3 days, closer to 20 or 25, and hopefully they won't, then you'll be able to protect this. So now I'm going to put this down and tell you what the next question is that I get as a common question. And that question is, can I take my herbs and bring them in the house? Well, the answer is yes, and the answer is no. The answer is, technically yes, you could take all your herbs and grow them in your house during the winter months, and you just need to make sure that you have a sunny window or you have a grow light. But one of the things when I was talking about the potted plants is that your kale or cabbage, your pansies, they can actually fairly close last through the winter months in pots outside. Well, there are certain herbs also that I have on my deck outside all winter months, and when I need them, I just walk outside to that deck and clip them. And those herbs are oregano, those herbs are parsley. Dill kind of dies back, but you don't want to bring that in. Not the dill, I mean the onions. And so marjoram is another herb. And then you have your other herbs that you definitely need to make sure that you bring inside if you want to continue. And some of your herbs like basil, you really want to bring that inside around Labor Day. This year, I didn't bring my basil in Labor Day. I had an incredibly wonderful crop. I was looking at all that pesto I was going to make, and we had an unexpected cold snap. And this unexpected cold snap actually came right around Labor Day, and I lost all my basil. Now there's other herbs, and this herb is one of my favorites. This herb is lemon verbena. And lemon verbena is a shrub if you live in Georgia or if you live in Florida. It doesn't really normally make it here in Virginia, although this particular one, and by the way, I have a picture of oregano and lemon verbena in my pot there on my deck, and that lemon verbena actually came from last year, and we didn't, why? Because we had a very mild winter. So sometimes if you have a mild winter, the shrub will die back for the season, for the winter months, but it'll actually start growing again in the spring. Other times, harsh winter, it doesn't grow. So when you want, and what I want to talk about, lemon verbena to me is too large of an herb to grow inside. So this is one of the herbs that I actually take and I dry. And I just wanted to take a few moments. And this herb, your woody herbs like lemon verbena, you can leave out until the night temperatures are 45 degrees before you harvest them. And the best way to harvest them is in the morning hours. That's when the essential oils are the strongest in the leaves. And there's two ways that you can harvest them when you bring them in to dry them. One way is to take what I have here is a whole sprig, and then what I would do is I would take either string, or I would take, in this case, an elastic band, and I would tie either the string or the elastic band at the base, and then I would take a hook and I would just hang it in an area that is a dry area. That's one way to dry your lemon verbena or any herb. The other way is to, and of course, the first way you don't really have to wash it, but I do recommend washing it. And then the second way is washing it, and then what I do is I simply cut off or tear off little parts like this, and I just lay it on a tray like that and leave it in a room that's a fairly dry room for just about 24, 48 hours, and I end up with wonderful lemon verbena that's harvested and dried, and I use it on fish. You can use it on chicken. I make tea. Also, as an essential oil, it's a calming effect. So this is one of those herbs, if you take the leaves and just crush them in your hands after one of those days, those difficult days, and oh, it smells so heavenly. It's a wonderful lemon smell that is just almost a sweet lemon smell. And that's why it makes such great tea. It makes great potpourri. It relaxes you when you crush it in your hands. Wonderful product. So that's my answer to when people ask, can I bring my herbs inside? Yes, you can. And as I said, with the lemon verbena, then that's one that you really want to be cautious. And then the final question for today that I have time, and I'll tell you, I had a list of 20 questions, but this last one is the only one that we have time for. And this is, when do I divide my perennials? There's a general rule of thumb, or actually the question is, can I divide my perennials in the fall? And the general rule of thumb with your perennials is that if it's a spring blooming perennial, like phlox or peony, you divide them in the fall. If it's an other blooming, then you divide them in the springtime. But there are certain perennials, your daylily and your liriope, that you want to divide either time. I personally prefer to divide my liriope actually now, and the reason is that it gives it time to grow, plus liriope, if you're not careful, if you see these ends here, these ends are normal with liriope, and liriope always in the spring months needs a haircut. So basically I would take my pruners or my scissors and in spring I would just clip these off, and that creates for a healthy liriope. But now it's fall and I want to divide my liriope. The key to when in fall to divide is, if at all humanly possible, 3 to 4 weeks before the major frost. And in Northern Virginia, that frost usually comes, the major frost usually comes around the end of November. And there's different tools depending. Now, of course, the example that I'm going to show you here is very, very small, so I won't be using the big guns. But I have some daylilies that are literally 4 feet wide. And perennials, especially daylilies, they really need to be divided either every 3 or every 4 years. I've been a little slow on my daylilies. That's why they're this huge. And the problem, if you don't divide, especially your daylilies, then what can happen is that they stop blooming. They're tired. They've gotten too old. They want to be young again. And so you rejuvenate them by dividing them. And you can go on so many different websites. And I have a customer at Burke Nursery who came to Burke Nursery and said, I have seen 10 different ways of how to divide daylilies and liriope. What do you do? Well, what I do when it's large, and I do this with my hostas as well, I get a shovel. And I get my shovel with the edge, not the shovel that has what I call a little snout. So you want that edge. And then I take the shovel and I literally take a look at how large that is. So what I will be doing with my daylilies over this weekend is that I am going to actually, because of the size, divide it into 4 different daylilies. And I am going to just use the shovel to divide them. The other that you can use is, you can use what I call a fork. And I'll actually be using the fork to show you here. Or you can use a trowel. I find the fork is a little easier than the trowel, again, because the trowel has this pointed arrow type edge. And to me, that makes it a little more difficult. So once again, I'm with the garden gloves. You will also hear people say that what you want to do is that you want to remove all the soil from the roots before you do any dividing. I don't do that. Especially with a huge daylily, I am not going to dig that daylily out that is 3 to 4 feet wide diameter. I'm not going to be digging it out and then removing all the soil. But I do recommend that when you actually decide to divide your plants, try to choose a day that it's a little cloudy. And the reason I say choose a day that's a little cloudy is that if the sun is too hot when you're doing the division, then what will happen is that your plant will start drying out and the soil will start drying out, and that will actually stress the plant. So you need to be mindful of the weather when you want to do your divisions. The other is, now because this is here in a container, the roots here are a little compacted, so you wouldn't normally see roots like this. The roots would normally be coming out. But basically, if I'm dealing with a small one, I would put it to the side like this. I would take a look at what's going on. Is there any natural separation? Because sometimes these plants will actually divide themselves. And when I look up here, there appears to be a natural separation. But when I look here, I don't totally see that natural separation. So I'm going to go with the top part here, the leaves here, and I'm taking my fork and just using my fork, just dividing this. And it may seem like I'm not being very gentle, and in this case, appearances aren't deceiving. I'm not being very gentle. I'm being very cautious, but I'm also realizing that I'm separating this and dividing this in a way that will enable me to then now have 2 or 3 plants, and what I will do then is just plant each one separately. So now that I have taken my fork, I now have 2 plants. And what I'm going to do is pretend that this is my garden. And I am going to take and plant each plant in my garden. So from having the one plant, the one liriope, and if we had time, I'd actually divide this as well. But you always run out of time when you're having fun. So here I have, out of that one liriope, I now have 2 liriopes. And the other is that if I were planting this in my garden, I'd be planting this a foot apart. So there you go. That's how you divide your plants. I hope that you enjoyed my tips on how to prepare for the winter. I'm your host, Misty Kucheris, and I'd like to thank you for spending your time with me here at Gardening with Burke Nursery. I'm looking forward to helping you grow your garden. Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, as well as the October month-long Pumpkin Playground Festival featuring hayrides and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.